Here's our next Spring Flood Outlook 2019 video. The last video we focused on the Red River in the north, and now we are going to focus today on the Mississippi River. And also we're going to just take a look at a broad national view of the spring flood potential. So we'll start with this big, broad national view of the spring flood potential across the United States. You can see this is locations that have a greater than 50% probability of exceeding river flood levels during March, April, May timeframe. So this is across the entire nation. 471 gauges show greater than 50% probability of minor flooding. 178 have a greater than 50% chance of moderate flooding. And 135 gauges show a greater than 50% probability of major flooding as we go into springtime. Now this is a pretty high number. It's not too often we see such widespread threat. This widespread threat of flooding. So that's 784 gauges total across the United States based on the current outlooks. 784 gauges have the potential, have a greater than 50% probability of flooding, and most of it is focused on the Midwest region, north central United States, where many areas currently have a very thick snowpack. But today we are going to focus on the Mississippi River because that is obviously a very critical river here. Now, basically, all north of the Ohio River confluence at Cairo, Illinois, basically all up and down the Mississippi River actually has a pretty high chance of seeing major flooding going into this spring. And you can see basically this is my cursor following the Mississippi River from like St. Paul, Minnesota, all the way down. It just goes all the way down. There's just major flooding. We got there's a couple locations that show actually more moderate flooding, like down here at Gregory Landing, Missouri, and at Canton. Some of these locations are actually already flooding, and that's actually mostly due to the most recent snowmelt and runoff. We actually had a heavy rainfall event over the area. But let's start here, Minnesota. So the Mississippi River begins up here in Minnesota. I believe that's the Minnesota River. So here's the Mississippi River at St. Paul. We'll take a look at the flood probabilities at St. Paul. So right now, the Mississippi River at St. Paul, just kind of glancing at this, has a greater than 95% probability of exceeding major flood stage as we go into this spring. So that's pretty crazy there. Greater than 95% at Hastings. So basically this means that it's almost guaranteed that it is going to reach the major flood category as we go into the spring right here. Actually, the Mississippi River goes farther north than that, my bad. So like the Mississippi River at St. Cloud actually has a potential to flood there. The flood potential is not quite as high. Mississippi River, like right up in here, the flood potential is just slightly lower, probably due to the higher elevation in this area. But basically from St. Paul, Minnesota, all the way down, the potential for major flooding along the Mississippi River is very high this spring. Mississippi River at Red Wing has a 92% probability of seeing major flooding. At Lake City, we got 61.7% probability of seeing major. At Wabasha, Minnesota, 82.1% probability of seeing major flooding or higher. More moderate flooding expected at Alma, Wisconsin. Minnesota City, Minnesota has a 64.39% probability of seeing major flooding. And you can just see the probability is really high, going all the way down the length of the Mississippi River, essentially. The probabilities as you go towards McGregor Iowa, the probability is once again greater than 95% of exceeding the major flood stage of 22 feet. Let's look at St. Paul, because St. Paul's a more significant population center. The record crest at St. Paul was set in 1965, and it was 26.01 feet. That's really, really high. The major flood stage is 17 feet at St. Paul. And so the record crest here is almost 10 feet above the major flood stage. So the top of the levee for South St. Paul is 29 feet. And this is currently showing a probability of actually getting into that record territory. It's not an incredibly high probability, but the probability is there. The probability of reaching a stage of 25 feet, which is pretty close to the record there, it's within the top 2 floods. The probability right there is 20% already. And then the probability of going into actual record territory is a little bit less than that. So record flooding is not a certainty, but the possibility is there. And let's take a look at our weekly probabilities. No, sorry, that's not what I wanted. Weekly chance of exceeding levels. That's what I wanted. Yeah, you can see right there. The probability is pretty high. It looks like within a couple weeks our chances of seeing major flooding start going up. I know the parts of the northern United States are expected to finally get above freezing after being below freezing for many months. So we could start to see river rises here within a week, or actually this week, I mean. So you can see the potential. Again, this is at St. Paul, Minnesota. Potential for some significant flooding is very high. There are some low-lying roads that will definitely become impassable with this flood. As long as the levees hold up, though, the city of St. Paul should be safe from really severe flooding. With the levees hold up to 29 feet, it looks like. Let's take a look at our FEMA flood layers. Yeah, you can see there are some zones where flooding is possible, but most of everybody is safe from the river as long as the levees hold. But just so you know that a major flood is coming, so there may have to be some dike reinforcements to make sure they don't leak and there's no flooding that forms beyond the levees. Okay, so let's go further south. Now we want to go south east. Darn it, that's not what I wanted. Anyways, you get the idea, I think. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, there we go. Maybe. You can see we do have some river flooding along the Mississippi River right now, or actually it's mostly just some of these sites becoming more elevated. But down here into like the border of Iowa and Illinois, the flood potential is very high as well. Let's look at the Quad Cities. That's actually the Mississippi River at, well, we'll do Rock Island, because that's the gauge that we use for the Quad Cities area. You can see currently we are expecting some higher river levels to reach the Quad Cities area this week due to runoff. Weekly chance of exceeding levels. You can see the probability of seeing major flooding is very high as you go into, it looks like the highest flows will be towards mid-April, and this is because it'll take some time for the flood crest that starts up near like St. Paul, like we were just looking at. It'll take some time to get down towards Rock Island. And it's worth mentioning that as that crest moves downstream like that, depending on the weather conditions at the time, it can pick up quite a bit of water, more and more water. So you can see that the potential to go much above major flood stage is there for the Quad Cities region. The the flood of record, which was set in 1993, it was 22.6 feet at Quad Cities, and you can see the potential is actually very high, much higher than what you'd want it to be, to see us get close to that record. You can see here that's 22 feet. That's a 50% probability of reaching 22 feet by mid-April. So that would come pretty close to the record. That would definitely be in the top 4 for sure. But if it goes even higher than that, there's at least a 25 to 50% probability of reaching 23 feet, and that would top the record at the Quad Cities region. So let's go during the entire period. Yeah, so that's not good at all. Right here, we actually have a pretty high chance, or a pretty significant probability of getting into that record threshold. So 22.5 feet is close to the record, and the probability of reaching or exceeding 22.5 feet right now is about 55%. So that's greater than 50% probability of seeing a record flood in the Quad Cities region. So this is the kind of flooding we are talking about this spring along the Mississippi River. We're talking major flooding along a lot of its length. We've had major flooding down in the south already on the Mississippi River. I'm not sure if the spring flooding is going to reach, past the Ohio confluence. There's some times that it does not. But the southern part of the Mississippi River has already experienced significant flooding. But yeah, this is a very, very significant situation. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the dikes. On the good side of things, the top of the flood walls are not reached until 29 feet, and we're currently expected to stay below that. But there probably will be a lot of reinforcing of those dikes and levees and flood walls and all that, just to make sure they hold whenever there's a lot of water coming through the area. Because when the Mississippi River does get this high, and we've seen it before, there's been lots of times where the levees do fail. So that's something we may have to be a little concerned about, considering the predicted heights of these rivers. Let's go farther downstream. Illinois City, very similar situation there. The record crest is 24 feet, and there's pretty high probability of getting close to that. It's at Muscatine, Iowa, same situation. Not good at all for sure. New Boston, same story. It's basically going to be the same story all the way down, probably to the Ohio River confluence at Cairo, Illinois. Let's keep going downstream. Keithsburg. You guys are probably getting the idea by now. That major flooding. This does include St. Louis as well. Let me go ahead and just zoom out. This will probably be the last specific gauge I show you, because St. Louis is a major population center. Here is the flood probability for the Mississippi River at St. Louis, and you can see it is rising because, again, we had heavy rain through the area. Now it takes quite a bit of water to get St. Louis to really flood. So the probability is not quite as high as it is to the north. However, it is still high. It is still looking likely that we are going to get into the flood, past flood stage. You can see there's greater than 60% probability still of getting into the major flood category, which is at 40 feet. A flood of record is not looking likely at St. Louis at this time. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm going to continue to make these videos as we get closer to the spring flood. Thank you.